I have a schedule that allows me to do these things, and most people would say, Bill, you got to find something else to do with your life. But I was able to either listen to or watch nearly all of the hearing yesterday, the House hearing with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and listen to the Q&A throughout the day. And most of the questioning dealt with either, well, two things. Number one, Trump collusion with Russia or Clinton collusion with Russia. But it was very refreshing at one point during the actual hearing. Somebody had some other questions for Attorney General Sessions, and that was Idaho's Raul Labrador, the representative, joining us this morning. And first of all, sir, welcome back to our program.
Well, great to be on your show.
You were asking the AG about a couple of issues. One, of course, you're in agreement on, and that is religious liberty. But number two, you pinned him down on civil asset forfeiture, which is getting to be there's lines being drawn in the conservative movement between those people who feel it's really running in the face against our Constitution and those along the lines of the AG who feel it's a necessary evil. Do you feel you got a satisfactory answer?
Well, I have a lot of respect for Attorney General Sessions. I have worked with him on issues. We have been friends for a long time. But we agree on some issues and we disagree on some issues. As you indicated, the first half of my questions were about the First Amendment Protection Act, which I think he was a co-sponsor of in the Senate when, the First Amendment Defense Act, which he was a co-sponsor in the Senate when I co-sponsored it along with Mike Lee. And we had a good conversation about that, about protecting religious groups, individuals, religious freedom. But he and I disagree on civil asset forfeiture. I think there's been abuse. I think it's a great tool that law enforcement can use when somebody has been found guilty of a crime. But what they tend to do is they tend to take the assets even when somebody's not found guilty of a crime. And as I always tell the audiences in town hall meetings and other things, I believe in the entire Constitution. I don't believe just in the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, which is, the amendments that conservatives like to talk about. I actually believe in the Third and the Fourth and the Fifth, all the way down. I believe we should follow our Constitution to the letter. And when it comes to taking away people's property rights, I think we should make sure that we have proper due process. And I don't think the civil asset forfeiture laws, both at the state level and at the federal level, appropriately protect people's rights.
I have had some guests on the air, and I get some conflicting responses to it. Some people say, well, we don't do it in Idaho, but I've seen evidence that it has been done, and you referenced the state of Idaho as well. Is it that there's somebody's interpreting civil asset forfeiture maybe differently than other people?
Well, there's two types of cases. There's the type of case where I think police officers or departments will abuse the civil asset forfeiture laws, and I haven't heard in many cases, if any, in Idaho where people are sort of going beyond the reach of the civil asset forfeiture. But we do have problems in the United States. In fact, Clarence Thomas just recently wrote an opinion where the Supreme Court decided not to take a civil asset forfeiture case, and he agreed that they shouldn't take it because they didn't have the proper jurisdiction. But he wrote a pretty scathing opinion on the abuses of the civil asset forfeiture law, and he named several examples where police departments in the United States had actually, forced people to sign waivers to their civil asset forfeiture rights, or else they were going to file trumped-up charges. So that's the extreme, and I've never heard of a case like that in Idaho, but we do need to protect that at the federal level. The other end of the spectrum is cases where they're following the law. These are proper police departments that are following the law, but the law, I think, is allowing them to take assets without due process. So it's something where even the proper application of the law, I think, violates the Fifth Amendment, and that's what we need to really take care of in Idaho. It's not something where people are abusing the system. It's just where I think the law in Idaho has actually allowed people to take people's property without due process, and the legislature actually tried to fix it. I believe it was last year the legislature took steps to fix this, and the governor vetoed it. And I think that was completely wrong of the governor. I think it's something that we need to do properly. I think before you take anybody's property, you have to make sure that there's a finding of guilt, if there's something that is tied to the taking of that property.
I'm a little disappointed mainstream media doesn't pay more attention to that, your line of questioning as well, because all of the discussions about this scandal or that scandal involving Russia will go away at some point. But this issue of civil asset forfeiture is one we seem to be mired in, and it's really much more important, I think, to most of the American people.
Well, I think there's two reasons why the media doesn't pay attention to it. The first reason is because it's a bipartisan issue. So this is something where I'm actually working with Democrats on trying to crack down on the abuses of civil asset forfeiture law. And they don't like to talk about that because what they want to present to the American people is that nobody in Congress gets along, right? so actually having members of Congress, a conservative like myself and a liberal from another state actually working together on an issue that brings both sides together, they don't like to talk about that. But the other one is that they just can't get over the fact that President Trump won the election. If you think about it, Attorney General Sessions, even though he and I disagree on the civil asset forfeiture issue, he's a man of integrity. He's someone who's fair, who's honest, who's been guided by the right principles throughout his career. But the Democrats continue to attack him on his character. And it's actually quite pitiful to watch. If you had the opportunity to watch that whole hearing was embarrassing for the Democrats because they kept trying to paint him into a corner, and I think he was disarming in the way that he approached them. I tend to be a little bit more direct. I don't have that Southern charm that he has, and maybe it's that slaw drawl or whatever it is. That he wouldn't let him he never let them get under his skin. And I thought, these Democrats can't they just can't accept that the 2016 election was lost by them. So they keep working every single day to overturn the election. I was just watching the news as I was getting ready this morning, and there's an ad about how we need to impeach Trump, and all these different things. But the real story is how the Democrats, specifically the Clinton campaign, they paid for a document that was filled with wild accusations about Donald Trump. These documents, I think, may have been used by the FBI to obtain a warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. I mean, think about that. The highest levels of government used a trumped-up charge and a trumped-up document to spy on their political enemies. And they're claiming that it's the Republicans that are trying to turn the United States into a banana republic. That's what happens in banana republics, is when the top levels of government spy on their political enemies. And that's what happened in the United States. It looks like they used that to make up charges against some people in the Trump administration. And I think that is unconscionable. This reminds me of Watergate. But the media doesn't report it that way.
I know you've got a busy schedule today. We've got about 30 seconds before you have to move on, but anything else we should keep our eyes open for in the next
this week
weeks?
We're working on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is the H.R. 1, and it's a bill that lowers individual tax rates, doubles the standard deduction, expands the child tax credit. It's a bill that I'm looking at. I don't love the bill. I think I think it's unfortunate that we haven't made it even more conservative than it needs to be. But we are looking at the bill right now, and I think it does have some good things in it, and we're going to have a vote on it, I think, tomorrow.
Well, good luck. We look forward to speaking to you again.
All right. Thank you so much.
Take care, sir. Representative Raul Labrador from Idaho's 1st District joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 8:15. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. And we have 28 on our way today, likely into the 40s. We may start seeing some mix of rain and snow over the next few days, but the weekend, if you're planning anything for the weekend, still looks very, very good. For those of you who happen to sit through any of the Jeff Sessions, call it Inquisition yesterday, you will have noticed a lot of people are trying, as the representative said, to derail Sessions or perhaps get under his skin. Now, you got to remember, before he was a member of the U.S. Senate, Jeff Sessions had served some time as U.S. attorney in Alabama. And so he has a prosecutor's background, knows how the court system works. And as Mr. Labrador said, he's very disarming when it comes to some of these questions. But he can also turn it around and be a little bit forceful. Liberal media today, you take a look at the pages of the Washington Post, for instance, and the New York Times, and they're all saying Sessions has a bad memory, he doesn't remember this conversation or that conversation. What they're leaving out of this, and I thought it was interesting, Sessions said at one point, yeah, I met with the Russian ambassador in my office. That was part of my committee's work in the U.S. Senate. He was still serving in the U.S. Senate. And I think he said he threw out a number. He'd met with more than 24 other ambassadors during that same time frame from 24 other countries. So is he colluding as well with England and France and Myanmar and South Africa, whoever he was meeting with? Is he colluding with them to get Trump elected? And it seems that if the Democrats, if this is all they've got left, they keep saying we're going to have a banner year in 2018 and we're going to get the White House back in 2020. But where's your salesmanship? How are you going to provide work for people? And if Mr. Trump is turning the economy around, how are you going to claim he isn't? Because I can see those numbers. I just heard the jobs figures again, some of the latest updates during the course of Fox News at 8 o'clock this morning, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX. The numbers look pretty good. Automobile sales are up, bouncing back. There was a time just in early spring when we were being told that sales were going to be falling and we were going to be seeing people. There was some discussion that the restaurant business was falling off and that we were going to see massive closures and bankruptcies in many of these big restaurant chains over the course of the next several months. Hasn't happened. And all of these things are indicative that perhaps confidence has been restored in the U.S. economy. And if you've got growth that is chugging along in excess of 3%, and if it stays that way, we can't predict that it will, but if it stays that way, then I think we're going to see a lot of this talk about Russia fade away, and the other side isn't going to have a whole lot to hang its hat on. Coming up on 19 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com, but a short break in just a couple of minutes. I do want to remind people there is some snow in the forecast. Not a lot. It doesn't. There's a couple of days I looked at the forecast this morning where you might see it turn over to wet snow. It won't be with us for very long, but we are dealing with some colder weather. And those of you out there who have not yet, and I have been very frugal about it myself, I don't have the heat on a lot, but as I think I told you a couple of weeks ago, I went to flip the heat on and I got just cold air. I didn't get anything. And it turned out to be just a tiny little part, and it got replaced and the heat came back. Believe me, I'm very pleased about that. But if you are having some issues, you need to call the pros at Ramsey Heating Electric in Burley. They'll come out. They'll get the job done. They'll get it done right the first time. Problem-free, cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric. That's 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. The telephone number is 208-678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. Mr. Labrador, when he's talking, by the way, is Representative Labrador with us during these segments, is not campaigning for governor, but I thought it was interesting. He made a comment that when it came to civil asset forfeiture changes on the state level, the legislature in Boise was for it last year, but the governor wasn't. Hint, hint, if you elect Raul Labrador, we will get a law preventing some of the abuses of civil asset forfeiture. Just wanted to pass that along. Trip Family Medicine coming up in about 15 minutes.